This is the day. Your steering committee of IT has made its conclusions. It's time for a generative AI proof of concept. And of course, you're the lead architect or IT manager or delivery manager or innovation manager in this company, right? And the task, lucky you, comes to you, right? So let's talk about that, about what you're going to learn from a generative AI proof of concept. This is the aim, and we are monitoring augmented intelligence. In the aim, we are monitoring the progress and of technologies related to artificial intelligence, in particular in the corporate world, but not only, also as far as our individual lives are concerned, right? But today I want to zoom in on the corporate world. And to be fair, this podcast could have been as well published, and maybe I will, but published in another room of the Camel Hall, right? The room called Drive and Thrive, how to drive a successful business and make it thrive, right? But I've chosen another room of the Camel Hall, which is the AI Monitor, which is the room we are in today. It's hard to avoid talking about generative AI these days. There's such a hype everywhere, and the advent of this technology and of AI models and services has sparked huge interest all over the planet in all walks of life and any vertical you can imagine in the economy. Right? It's really in a frenzy we have seen over the last few months in the business world in particular. People talking about the promises of productivity gains and all the automation that you can do with generative AI, and the competitive edge it's going to bring to your company if you adopt it in a timely manner. That's probably true, right? To add some fuel to the fire, you can trust vendors, right? To frame all the IT managers but not only CEOs and sales and marketing managers about how they are going to miss out if they don't jump onto the bandwagon, right? This is really a bit of a FOMO, fear of missing out that we see happening at scale on the planet, primarily targeted at CIOs and CTOs. These guys are under huge pressure to talk and to have an opinion about generative AI and what sort of silver bullet it's going to be for the business and for the stakeholders to expect superior returns, right, within the next few months. Really, everybody is talking about that. What do you think? What are you talking about? Are we doing something about generative AI? Is what comes on all lips at the moment in boards and executive committees. Okay, so the fear of missing out. So as a result, many organizations have embarked already themselves onto a POC, a proof of concept, and that's really interesting. We will talk at length about POCs and POVs, proof of concepts and proof of values in the Drive and Thrive podcast in the next room of the Camel Hall, right? But today, let's stay focused on artificial intelligence. So what can generative AI do in the workplace? Let's prove it. Let's do a prototype, a pilot, right? We need to make sure that as you jump into the waters, right, to probe the temperature, do that with a bit of caution and thinking beforehand, right? Because under pressure and anxiety, nothing good is going to come out of that. And that's the point I want to cover today in this podcast. You really need to understand what are the opportunities, of course, but also what are the risks and the caveats, okay? So the first thing I would like to say is that when you're in the context of such frenzy and hype surrounding generative AI, that creates really a fertile ground for a lot of common biases and fallacies, right? So these are really, it's a treasure trove, really, when people act in a rush, in a hasty manner, rather than thinking it through beforehand, right? And I just want to name a few of the biases you might face and the fallacies you would have to deal with, right? So the first one and the obvious one would be something I would call myself the hammer bias. And the tenet is that when you have a hammer in your hands, everything looks like a nail, right? So you're looking for nails to use your hammer, okay? So there's There's a more normalized name for that. It's the confirmation bias, right? So you have an opinion, you have an idea, and you are going to look at any opportunities to prove yourself right. It's self-righteousness in a sense, okay? So this is the first one you're going to stumble upon, the hammer bias. And really, we will try to prove ourselves right and ignore anything contradicting our beliefs, okay? Vendors, software vendors are going to push this button heavily, right? And trying to frame you as a procurement person or technology leader or even CEO to tell you, oh, yeah, look, we've got the solution and it's going to solve everything, the hammer bias, okay? There's also what we would call the availability heuristic, right? So because something is available, in a sense, we are going to tend to overestimate the benefits it's going to have, right? We are going to look at all the success stories out there. So it's available, so therefore it has to be used for something. Surely there are use cases and surely it's got values. Well, that's a fallacy, of course, and we'll come back to that because this is also a really important part of these podcasts to point out and to reveal our biases and fallacies. We all fall to it in different contexts. We'll talk about it in the switch, another room of the camel hole, maybe this way, the camel hole. Drive and thrive, Sustainix, lots of fallacies and biases. But there would be others, like, for instance, when you're talking in your executive committee or steering committee about technology, architecture, roadmap, about the need of generative AI, you will face a lot of loaded questions, right? Which are questions already including their answers, right? So people are going to orient the decision making by loading the questions already with predefined answers, okay? So we call that also begging the question or begging the answer, right? So you'll have to call these out as you go, especially if you're in the decision making position and your responsibility is on the line, right? Making sure that you bust that out. Okay, so it's really a context where it's like a minefield that you have to navigate to avoid the typical biases that most people around you are going to have, including very senior people, and that you are going to be able to spot and call out, right? So for that, of course, you'll gather around you people who can keep cool head and cold blood and talk about things in a passionate manner, of course, about innovation, but in a dispassionate manner as well when it comes down to when the rubber hits the road about the real outcomes, okay? So it's important you acknowledge that before you start anything. Now, again, before we jump into a deeper discussion about generative AI and the value a POC or a POV is going to bring to your business, let's try to make the difference between a POC and a POV. POC stands for proof of concept, and POV stands for proof of value. Why do we have two terms? There's good reason for that, obviously, right? Let's start with the POC, proof of concept, which is the most common. People would use in a relevant or less relevant manner, unfortunately. But a proof of concept has the purpose of a proof of concept is to demonstrate that a technology or an idea can work, that it's feasible, it's doable, right? Regardless of its interest, its value, but can we do it, right? That's the core question and underlying question. Can it be done, right? And it's really the focus is really very technical usually, and around the functionality. Is it viable? Can it be assembled? Right? Usually, it's most suitable for small scale or single feature sort of ideas or technologies. Okay, and in terms of timing in the value chain, you would ask this question very early on, right? When the technology starts popping on the radar, for instance, on your innovation radar. Start seeing it blip on the radar, you start asking yourself, okay, interesting, can it be done? Okay, proof of concept. Proof of value is quite different, actually, right? Because the proof of value aims at defining and articulating if this idea or this technology has a tangible value for the business, right? Okay. Assuming it can be done, right, which is the assumption, but question is not can it be done, it's should it be done, right? Is it worth doing? Is it going to give us any value and bang for our buck, so to speak, right? So there's already a notion of return on investment in a sense, right? So we're talking here about business impact, return on investment, and the practical applications. We're starting to talk about use cases, right? Proof of concept is usually very academic, so to speak. It's in the lab or the garage room. It's very early in the cycle of innovation. Proof of value is already, we're on the verge of making an investment decision. Okay, so yeah, the focus will be on business impact. The scope will be, as a result, more comprehensive, right? It's not just a single feature. We are going to start looking at commonalities and factors of scale, this kind of scale, right, of things. And usually the timing of a proof of value is slightly after a proof of concept, after, definitely. Sometimes before. You even skip the fact that it's feasible or not because maybe it's trivial or you don't care, but because other people are doing it already, right? So you take it for granted and you ask yourself, but does it have any value for me, right? And that would send us into, for instance, the realm of having a value, a feasibility matrix assessment, right? And that's something that we'll talk again in Drive and Thrive. It's strategic assessment about disrupting changes coming in, right? Or technologies typically, but other changes where you can ignore, adopt, adapt, right? Or just buy, right? Which is really when it's really a commodity. Okay, so this kind of strategic analysis will become important when we talk about proof of concept, proof of value, right? Usually, a proof of concept or proof of value results from an assessment, adopt or adapt. If you say, oh, we need to adopt this technology, you're going to make a proof of value. If you already know, you're going to adopt it. If you're thinking about adapting this technology to your business and you're not sure, then you're going to do a proof of concept. See? That's the way I would say it articulates. Okay, so that's terminology clarification, which is super important, of course, to make sure we're not tripping ourselves in the conversation. So now let's talk about what would be the typical outcome desired from a POC or a POV. Okay, assuming decision has been made to go, and actually you've received today this mail from the steering committee saying, hey, Lucas, or you, we are starting a POC or a POV on this technology, right? So you're going to have a checklist of the things that you will need to cover, right, in this POC and this POV. I'm going to stop distinguishing them here, but the areas you're going to cover are primarily for POV, which is the most mature stage, will be risk mitigation. The purpose of a POV would be to identify risks early and start thinking about how we are going to mitigate them. It's going to be about optimization and customization, right? So especially if you're in an adapt strategy, you're taking a technology to adapt it to your business, you're going to start about scoping the fine-tuning and the customization that will be required in the technology or in the business, in your existing processes, to make sure that it's going to be a good fit, right? And it's going to define an adoption path. You will need to, the value of a POV will be to gain the stakeholders' buy-in, right? It's going to be about gathering all these proof points and data points that are necessary for ultimately for the shareholders and the exec stakeholders to push on the button and make an investment decision. POV is going to help you also anticipating on your training needs, anything that needs to be done in terms of staff upskilling, training, or hiring new talents, which will be the case certainly for generative AI technologies, for instance, right? So training plans. You need to talk about integration planning. This technology is not going to work generally in isolation. It's going to come in an existing ecosystem and landscape, and most of your use cases are likely to involve integration, right? So you will start with an inventory of the integration points around your use cases and starting to think about how is this going to pan out and stagger in terms of a sort of multi-month or multi-year roadmap, for instance. Of course, there will be the cost estimates. That's a big part of a POV and more than a POC, right? You're going to start thinking how much is it going to cost and how much is it going to return, potentially, for the return on investment calculation. And then you have ancillary consideration that the POV will cover, such as performance aspects, security aspects, of course, vendor relationship and assessment aspects, due diligences. If it's a technology which is owned by only one vendor with a competitive edge, fair enough, right? But usually you will have a few contenders on the marketplace, so you need to do as part of your POV your diligences, right, to build your business cases. And more generally speaking, you'll talk about change management around the impact and the use cases you've selected for this technology. Okay, so that's the classic sort of roll down. I would say 10 key points that your POV will cover. Okay. At the end of the day, it's really about answering the why question. Why are we doing it? And then the how, what, who, and when. Now, let's focus more specifically on the generative AI POC you're going to run, right? So the temptation would be to do what everybody else is doing. Okay, let's do a generative AI POC. Let's try to implement GitHub Copilot or Microsoft Copilot or Google whatnot or Anthropic Claude or etc. Right? So, and there's a lot of caveats and pitfalls, right, to understand if you're doing that without thinking too much about it, right? Because for generative AI, it's not about, again, the bias is not about thinking it's going to be a silver bullet for everything. And there's a number of other considerations. It's not going to be on the obvious use case that you're going to have a win. All right, so I really want to cover that. So my first advice would be that, we would look with generative AI at seeking real transformation opportunities, right? The most obvious use cases are not necessarily the good ones. They might be the least valuable ones. For instance, GitHub Copilot, it's going to help your developers increase their day-to-day productivity and shave maybe half an hour of their work, presumably, right? So what? Big deal. Yeah, we knew that already, right? Suffice to look at all the benchmark and success stories and testimonies all around the planet. People have been doing that already for 2 years, doing GitHub Copilots in their organization. So surely you can benchmark yourself towards that. Running this GitHub Copilot POC in your organization, you will need to dig a little bit deeper for gold, right? It's not just this trivial and boring KPI you are after, okay? That's not where the value stands, right? So, for instance, though, to stay in software development, the true potential of AI is not in refactoring lines of codes. Really, that's really boring. No, it's at the next level up. It's at solution design level or even architecture level, right? And we're talking about leveraging generative AI as a sparring partner in an architecture team or solution design team, right? I've done that myself recently. I'm bound to confidentiality, so I can't reveal that, but I've been working actively with Code Llama. And it's been instrumental to defining some great solution design elements. Absolutely. So I would really encourage you to go in that space more than, the commoditized already, should be free, embedded code assistant, okay? So don't just automate the mundane, right? Leverage AI to augment human creativity in the business and decision-making. That's where the edge is going to be. Because remember, AI lifts the floor for everyone, and it augments our intelligence, not just your IDE to edit lines of code and have code completions, really, okay? So that's the first caveat I would say. The second one is that beware the risk of rushing your experiments and your POC, right? If you're doing it in a rushed manner, the underlying risk is that you're going to outweigh the benefits. And the first risk I see is that you're going to, I would call that, dull your sharp knives. And the sharp knives I'm talking about here are people. Wherever they are, we could continue talking about software developers and architects, but we could talk about other parts of the business, right? People who are genuinely excited by generative AI and how it can really help them on a day-to-day basis not only automate their tasks, but also enrich their value proposition, right? help them deliver, increasing their own performance, right? So that's what's interesting. So if you rush your POC and you focus only on boring and low-level features and value, people are going to get bored and disengaged. And they are going to run their, generative AI at home for their own benefit, for sure, for their LinkedIn profile or whatnot, or for their personal projects. But they're going to come to the workplace and say, yeah, all right, my company is so behind. They're focusing on things which are already irrelevant, have been irrelevant already for 6 months. Okay, so dulling the sharp knives in the organization is a big risk if you don't aim high enough and in the right spot for your POC objective, right? So remember that AI should enhance human capability and not replace their critical thinking. Yeah, there's always a few decades in the back, right? What else? Third advice, maybe, to scope your POC, besides the things you want to cover, and making sure for generative AI is going to be relevant and sharp and compelling and engaging for your staff. Focus on substantive changes, things which are really material, as in even potentially disruptive, right? Don't waste your time and your resources and your energy trying to open doors which are already open, right? Things we already know. Try to remove the noise, right? And don't waste your time on things which are obvious. Captain Obvious would be the syndrome we are calling out here. But yeah, try to tackle things that matter. And they don't have to be big. I have seen use cases which are seemingly small, but they are such repetitive, boring, debilitating tasks, generally involving, reading files, reading dashboards, manipulating data on Excel spreadsheets. There's huge opportunities here to roll out a valid use case for Gen AI and automate the task and let your people's potential express itself somewhere else where they can be more creative, more proactive, and more prospective about how continuous improvement, right? The goal is really to make sure that you don't want just existing processes to become slightly faster, right? It's not the marginal improvements we are after here. It's the disruptive ones. It's the big steps, right? And it can be completely disruptive in the sense we reimagine some processes and the way we work all together. Again, I've got examples like that in the space of software solution design that I've seen have been really eye-opening. Talking to Code Llama or to Claude, for instance, and say, aha, I never thought about that, about this way of looking at a problem. I will probably end this podcast with some critical considerations, again, when it comes to generative AI and having a proof of value executed properly and in a relevant and informative manner. When you undertake a proof of concept or proof of value with generative AI, it's critical to look beyond the immediate technical capabilities and to consider the broader implications of what it's going to mean beyond this use case and this horizon you're looking at. There are in my eyes, four critical areas that you really need to cast your eyes on, right? And they are data privacy, right? That's and sovereignty. In general, in particular, if you're in a sovereign sort of business, would that be energy production? Would that be government? Would that be financial services? These kind of things, right? It's very sensitive here in Switzerland and in any country, really, to make sure that, you consider, the privacy, but also the sovereignty as an aspect of your generative AI. I'm saying sovereignty because, there are a lot of technologies which are coming from the other side of the Atlantic. Right? And we're talking about US companies and we're talking about a US government which has huge scrutiny on anything that happens around this globe, right? Including in Europe. They have the Patriot Act and there's a lot of acts that give them leonine privileges to potentially, cut services or subpoena you to disclose some data, right? So sovereignty is really an important concern. Okay, especially when we are talking about cloud-based solutions. Organization, they must scrutinize how the AI services they are picking handle the data, right? And in particular, sensitive information. What sort of safeguards can be put in place, right, to create and to prevent data leakage in particular. So DLP, data leakage protection, is a huge topic in this area. And how the system can align with industry-specific regulations, talking about health, for instance, or talking about financial services. And in Switzerland, for instance, we've got not only the legal framework, but we've got the regulator, FINMA, right? So we've got the NPD, National Data Protection Act, and we've got the FINMA, which is the bank, the data confidentiality for banks and the bank secrecy obligations. Okay, so it's not just compliance, right? It is, but it's also about making sure that as you implement generative AI, you gain and you secure the trust of your stakeholders, but ultimately of your customers. Okay? So you need to be able eventually to disclose and to be upfront and say, this is the AI we're using, and this is how we're using it in a responsible, safe, sovereign manner. Right? So it's very specific to this kind of technology, compliance and data safety. Okay? The second aspect you would have to embed in your POV, proof of value, will be, of course, considerations around intellectual property. Huge debate all around the world at the moment about how all these large language models, algorithms have been, vampirizing, sucking out all this content from the internet. Would that be the open web, or so-called open web? Hello, Mustafa Suleiman. We'll talk about that in a minute in the next episode of the AI Monitor in the Crunch. Or would that be the private web, right? With Perplexity AI, for instance, ignoring blatantly the directives given by robot.txt files, right? Saying, yeah, no, you're not supposed to crawl that. Well, let's crawl it anyway, right? And of course, there's IP protection at the source, what we are consuming to train our models in this generative AI effort. But there's also the IP in regurgitating some fabricated or hallucinated content, as that's the outcome of large language models and AI tools. Most of the time, they hallucinate to produce presumably novel content. Actually, it's not novel, it's rehashed, okay? And of course, you're at risk of training your model or feeding it sensitive content in terms of intellectual property, including, as far as your company is concerned, business intelligence, right? Industrial secrets, and then at risk to see that regurgitated out of a prompt or query to the model, being regurgitated to the wrong audience, right? So really this notion of how data can be handled not just from a confidentiality perspective, but from an ownership perspective and a property perspective is very specific to this technology, right? So you'll have to look into these IP-related concerns. That's number 2. Number 3, implementing generative AI in your business is going to raise a number of ethical questions, inevitably, right? We're talking about the ethics of AI and large language models, generally speaking, for all the vanilla models which are out there, produced by Google, Meta, OpenAI, Anthropic, to name Mistral, to name the leaders. But more specifically, when it comes down to implementing it in the organization, that's going to be the same thing in terms of ethics towards your employees, your managers, your stakeholders, and ultimately your customer, right? So really this encompasses not only the biases that the AI models you're leveraging can have, and God knows they have plenty of biases based on the training data they've been built on. At least they've got a big Western civilization bias, for sure, right? So you need to be aware of that, and this is calling out the entire area of responsible AI, right, which requires governance at enterprise level. It's not just about safety and cybersecurity, which is technical governance, and cost and all that, and sovereignty. It's also about this ethical governance, right? And the responsibility you bear in having this model, becoming an advisor to anyone, really, and producing recommendations, arguing for some decisions to be made, producing some content with hidden bias, that you're not even going to be aware of, because you're not aware of your own buttons that it's pushing or failing to push, like your censorship buttons, right, or your critical judgment buttons. So this is really important. So responsible AI needs to be a question and an entire area and section of your proof of value, no doubt about that, right? So because it can have far-reaching consequences for the business in terms of reputation, in terms of customer relationships, ultimately, right? If really we want to have a little bit of a scarecrow in the conversation here, right? Okay, so ethical questions, responsible AI, that was number 3. And then finally, number 4, something which is really specific to having a generative AI proof of value or proof of concept in the organization, is the entire remit of human resources and the impact it's going to have on human colleagues, right? Because generative AI comes as the last innovation in a long chain of technology and technological innovations that have all resulted into increasing automation of tasks which were previously run by humans, right? And thank you very much, science and technology, right? We've managed to get free from a lot of very tedious, very difficult, very dangerous tasks, physical tasks first, with the first industrial revolution, right, with steam power and all that. Then computation with and telecommunications, right, avoiding us to travel miles to transfer information. Computers avoiding us to have hours of computing with all the abacus, very tedious accountancy calculations. Nowadays, we are talking about a new technology that is going to be potentially able to automate heaps of tasks currently done by humans in the business. So there's 2 aspects in that. First, there is the emotional impact it's going to have on the workforce, right? On the downside, of course, generative AI is a very exciting technology. It's a bit of magic brought to the workplace in terms of all the beautiful things it can do quickly and very efficiently. It's like a magic wand thing, but also it's starting to beg the question, oh, damn, it starts doing a lot of my job here, right? Things that used to take hours are now taking minutes, right? Which is great for the big bosses up there and the shareholders, right? But for me, what am I going to do? So, of course, I can go to my manager and my HR and say, hey, can you give me a new role and a new job and a new occupation, right? But it's really an existential challenge at the end of the day for a lot of people. So you really need to manage that and communicate around that on the impact this massive automation coming in is going to have on the existing teams and processes and ultimately individuals. But also from a pure business perspective, you're going to start thinking about redeployment of your workforce. I'm not necessarily saying letting go, right? It can happen. And there's already in the press, a number of studies about, all the jobs that are at risk of, potentially disappearing or at least being dramatically impacted by AI, including in legal, including in health, education, and all that, right? But as I said, it's about augmented intelligence. My belief, and I think we'll see that unfolding in the next few months, is that everyone in their practice is going to see the floor lifted. So there's a number of things we're going to stop doing and we're going to delegate to our AI agents, but that's going to free up bandwidth for us to do something else and adding more value on top, right? Would that be cosmetics? Would that be depth of content? Would that be whatever it is? But for that, at enterprise scale, we need to talk about upskilling, training, converting, shifting people from one role to another, potentially learning an entirely new job, because you don't want to lose the relationship and the trust you have with this employee, right? Even if their skill is not useful anymore, even at all, 100%, which I doubt, but let's assume. You have a person here who has been completely replaced by an AI algorithm. You still have a person who knows extremely well the business and the craft and could at least be a supervisor and a trainer and a checker and a validator and a fine-tuner of AI agents, for starters. Or you would start moving this person sideways or downstream in the value chain, becoming a consumer of the what the agent produces, or to become a feeder of what the AI needs to do their job and to be trained properly. So there's plenty of opportunities before even thinking about how you're going to reduce your payroll, which maybe you will. Some businesses, let's be honest, are going to look at the opportunity to reduce the payroll, right? But the payroll is just one parameter of the equation, right? And what you want is increase your value proposition for your end customers. And for that, might want to keep your staff members and just retrain them and reskill them and remove them. So skills management, competencies management, roles definitions is going to be an entire remit of your AI strategy, of course. And as soon as your proof of value stage, you will have to have a chapter devoted to that. And it goes just beyond simple training. We're not just training people to start using AI. We're going to talk about training and upskilling and retraining completely differently people to shift the business and to shift it into the direction of higher performance, higher value. That's the vision I recommend, okay? Anyways, it's been a long ramble talking about generative AI and the hype, the FOMO, the anxiety it's causing to executives and company owners and shareholders in the world, and the pressure it puts on CTOs, CIOs out there. I know how you feel. But let's keep a cool head and our blood cold, right? Let's stick to our guns and make sure we progress with method, knowing what a POC is, knowing what a proof of value is, and knowing for generative AI what needs to be done to really be thorough, comprehensive, and do the correct diligences, right? So I think as we navigate this exciting, really, landscape of generative AI, of course, proof of concepts are important and proof of values are important as long as they're done properly, and we keep our critical thinking abilities switched on, okay? POCs demonstrate feasibility, right? Whilst POVs, proof of values, demonstrate business value, okay? So that might be two steps you want to take. Don't waste your time trying to open doors which are obviously already open, right? Don't do a POC for the sake of it to say, hey, I've done my GitHub Copilot POC. Yay! So what? Okay? You don't want to look like a dummy at the end of the day and at the next town hall. Okay? But I admit that even if adoption is certain of some technologies, of course they need to be investigated at the light of the idiosyncrasies and the specificities of your business, right? So look beyond the obvious, dig deep for gold. Don't forget the key considerations of data privacy, intellectual property, ethics, and what was the last one? And the impact it's got on the workforce, right, in terms of training. I think that's what I wanted to cover with you today. I hope that was useful. This is the AI Monitor, the AIM. We're talking about augmented intelligence, human intelligence augmented by technology. This is this room of the Camel Hall. The Camel Hall awaits for you with other rooms, Drive and Thrive, The Switch, Sustainix, very soon Kind Mind. Watch this space. But if you like this particular podcast and channel, please, by all means, give me a like underneath, and don't forget to hit the subscription or the subscribe button. This way you will get an alert and you'll know the next time I'm going to post on this channel. The next time will be a crunch, right? We've got plenty to talk about, but that's not for now. That's probably for tomorrow. For now, take care and leave the floor with AI.